Talked about the challenges the Nuggets have under the salary cap. They're in the second apron of the luxury tax. Kroenke said, when Nikola Jokic is on your roster, you're going to go for it. We have the best player in the world. We have a responsibility to him to try and go for it. We'll have Jeff Morton at DenverStiffs.com on the show later, who wrote a really great story over there talking about how things need to be rebalanced to fit around Jokic. The Nuggets have done everything they can, Sandy, to build this team around Jokic. He's the nucleus, and every part revolves around him. Starting five's been good. It was the rest of it that maybe led to the Nuggets' demise, if not directly, but indirectly by not being able to play them enough to keep the starters rested.
Yes, and there was a difference between this year and last year. Basically, last year, their championship season with 1 month to go, they had clinched first place in the Western Conference. The Western Conference is not nearly as strong in 22-23 as it was in 23-24. This year, not only didn't they have first place clinched, they didn't have second place clinched. Probably had third place pretty much cinched.
Right.
They were well ahead of the Clippers, as were the Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder throughout the course of the regular season. Those are the three teams that jockeyed for position. For most of the year, Minnesota was in first place. Oklahoma City was in either second or third. Denver was either in second or third. All three teams spent some time in first place. But the games down the stretch, and I do agree up to a point with Michael Malone, who said that this year was very different, and he was more or less forced to play the starters down the stretch because if not so much in the first round, in the second round, they were playing for home court advantage. They would have it by finishing first, of course. They would also have it by finishing second in the second round.
Right.
Beyond the second round, anybody's guess. Turns out they would have had it
in the
had they won
finals.
on Sunday. They would have had it going up against Dallas, which may or may not be a good thing because Dallas won at Minnesota last night, 108-105, coming from behind in the final minutes to do so. The kind of close game that we didn't see very often in the Nuggets series with the Timberwolves. But there was a reason to, as they say, go for it down the stretch. And maybe stretch your starters. Play them in games that last year they would have sat out. And this year, going into the final weekend, all the Nuggets had to do was beat San Antonio and then beat Memphis on the road, two teams that have been lottery teams all year.
Right.
And they would have been first. But everything changed on Friday night in San Antonio. The Nuggets were leading by 23 points in the third quarter. And you thought at that point they'd be able to rest Jokic in the fourth quarter and rest Murray in the fourth quarter and maybe some other starters as well. Lo and behold, the Spurs mounted a comeback led by Victor Wembanyama. And they beat the Nuggets. So the Nuggets not only had to play their starters a lot more than perhaps they anticipated when they had a 23-point lead, they lost the ball game too. So essentially, they lost their crack at first place. And they were playing on Sunday for second only if Minnesota lost to Phoenix.
Right.
Minnesota did lose to Phoenix.
Which they didn't do in the playoffs.
The Nuggets had to, again, play starters for a little while anyway to secure the win and get second place while Minnesota finished third. Of course, in the playoffs, anything can happen. The first and second place teams are gone now. You've got the third seed playing the 4 seed for the right to go to the NBA Finals.
In that game against the Spurs, only one Denver Nugget played more than 30 minutes. It was close. Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope all played 29. Jokic played 39 in that game, in which the Spurs won on that Devontae Graham floater at the end of it. But when you look at the way this breaks down, and Mavericks, slight correction, Mavericks are actually 5th seed because they were one behind the Clippers. But to give an idea of how much more difficult the Western Conference was, is there were 5 teams with 50 wins. The Thunder and Nuggets were tied with 57, and the Thunder had the tiebreaker, Minnesota with 56. All 3 of those records would have been number 1 last year in the West by 3 games.
Yeah.
Then you had the Clippers with 51 wins and the Mavs with 50. Phoenix had 49. Last year, only 2 teams even had 49 wins. The Nuggets at 53 and 29, and then Memphis, who tumbled off a cliff this year, with 51. So the West got substantially harder, substantially,
especially at the top.
Yeah, not a little bit, but a lot. I mean, you're talking about monumental jumps. And
I mean, the Nuggets won 4 more games than they did last year. They tied the franchise NBA record for wins in a single season.
Couldn't even take first in the conference.
The 2013 team also won 57 games, and it wasn't even good enough for first, and it was barely good enough for second. If Minnesota had won, Denver would have finished third.
Even with 57 wins.
If Minnesota had beaten Phoenix. And, of course, Minnesota and Phoenix played in the playoffs, and the Timberwolves swept the series.
Right. So this has been a challenging situation for the Nuggets because the West got much deeper. And, look, you're the champs. They're coming for you. That's the simple reality. And I think for the Nuggets, I think they understood that. But it was a more taxing year. Even the games against teams that were underwhelming came at them harder because to them it was kind of their championship. If you were the Spurs, if you were the Grizzlies, if you were the Houston Rockets, if you were those teams that you knew you weren't going to make the playoffs, but you could knock off the Denver Nuggets, these are the things that you can build upon going into the offseason. So Denver got everyone's best shot, and it turns out they either weren't deep enough to do it or they didn't have the setup all year long in the way the team was coached to get there. And that part is interesting because today GM Calvin Booth talked a little bit about the strategy in the last few drafts. Remember last year he had Julian Strawther and Hunter Tyson and Jalen Pickett, 3 very experienced guys. It took COVID years in a couple cases. So older guys, more experienced guys from major programs, in theory, ready to make the NBA jump a little bit more than a lot of the guys you see in the lottery that are 19 one and dones. So the idea is, with the salary cap being the way it is, the drafts and the quote-unquote holes in the roster, they're not going to be filled by stars. Here's what Calvin Booth said earlier today.
The long-term view is something that we're half satisfied with. And, Coach Malone is down there in the trenches trying to win every night. A lot of times those things are aligned, but sometimes they ebb and flow away from each other. And in my view, from where we started a couple of years ago, when we changed over most of the roster, we had to get bigger, we had to get more skilled. The first draft was a lot of defense. Last year's draft was a lot of shooting. Obviously, those guys are rookies and oftentimes not ready to play. Julian Strawther got to play some this year. Didn't shoot the ball particularly well for a period of time, but I think he's going to be a great shooter. So I think more than anything, they need more seasoning. We need to get in the gym, they need to play summer league, they need to get stronger. Obviously, maybe in the top 7, we can use a little bit more talent. Maybe there's a way to upgrade 1 or 2 positions and get a little bit more, get a guy that's a more accomplished NBA player for whatever slot they're taking. But I don't see anything that's like crazy out of sorts for our roster, to answer your question.
When he talks about the top 7, presumably what he means is the 7 guys that played in the playoffs, which would be your starting 5, Christian Brown, and the guy with the next best
really
minutes,
only 6 guys played,
Justin Holiday. And Justin Holiday at 34 was certainly not supposed to be one of the answers.
No.
But it sounded to me as if Booth was also, to an extent, and we'll talk more about this as we go along in the program, absolving Michael Malone and indicating that, okay, he thought his picks were ready to play, but maybe they weren't. And he understood that Michael Malone needed to win games in the moment.
Yes, and it's not surprising that during that type of press conference, kind of post-mortem of the season,
and you've had a couple
that
days,
you would see no room at all that you could detect between Malone's general view of things and Booth's general view of things. I still wonder if they are in fact on the same philosophical page. Of course, it's nothing personal. I'm sure they get along just fine. I did think, actually, at the end, there were some strains between Tim Connolly and Michael Malone. I thought that relationship actually once very, very close. 2 guys who thought basically very much alike, but they had different temperaments, and I thought there was an occasional strain in the relationship. I remember Malone after the bubble, very short off season. You'll remember this. Malone had always been able to count on basically the same team coming back the following years. The Nuggets improved gradually from the first year of Malone into the second year, the third year, and so on. But all of a sudden, coming out of the bubble, he had quite a few players on whom he had counted who did not come back. Jeremy Grant being the most notable, and he publicly voiced his displeasure over that notion that I've always had the chance to build a team over from one year to the next. But now I have different players, and I'm not that thrilled about it. Again, Malone is a win now guy.
But that is
and Malone
luxury.
said that at a time that wasn't that far removed from his job perhaps being on the line. So Malone, especially coming out of the bubble where the Nuggets did get to the conference final, I think it's a little different when you're operating without a home court, but we've been through that before. Malone wanted to win. I don't think there will be massive changes.
There can't
of course, things can always fall into your lap unexpectedly, but you're right. The CBA rules prohibit monumental change. So, yes, and I've never meant to suggest that people like Strother and Tyson and Pickett don't need to improve their games.
Right.
And that there was no reason not to play any of them. Even in Strother's case, he began when he first started to play this year, shooting a fairly high percentage and for the most part taking good shots. Then he tailed off and then he got hurt. And by the time he came back, who knows how healthy he was, who knows how ready he was to play, who knows how much trust Malone had in him even before he got hurt. So he didn't really play coming down the stretch. The other two guys didn't play at all. And once you establish a rotation in the regular season, you're hardly going to lengthen it during the playoffs. If anything, you'll shorten the rotation.
And all of that I get. But at the same time, Sandy, even Michael Malone has to understand that he's not Red Auerbach. Not that he's even the comparison to the coach, but the fact that he coaches in a different era. You don't get the luxury of knowing that all your players are coming back every year. The salary cap is designed to make sure that people move around. And so that, to my mind, I get it that Malone can be a little upset or a little agitated that he doesn't get to keep the same team every year. But as your team gets better, guys move on and get more money elsewhere. We saw it with Bruce Brown. We're going to see it.
You saw it with Jeremy Grant.
You saw it with Jeremy Grant. And for Malone to get bothered by that at a certain point, I'm not really sure if that makes sense. That's the gig in 2024. That's how it works. You're lucky if you can retain your starting five, let alone your team. So that's the reality the Nuggets have to deal with. We'll talk more about this because the concern is whether they're on the same page going forward now that the Nuggets have an absolutely critical offseason. But we'll remind you, by the way, that if you haven't had a chance, there's some really terrific other things to listen to here at Mile High Sports.
Absolutely. And of course, we're very thankful always for the fact that you listen to our podcast, subscribed to it, the Sandy and Shawn podcast, and you listen to our show every day, you watch it. We're very appreciative of that. You can listen on demand whenever your schedule permits, but we have plenty of other podcasts. We've talked about Ryan Blackburn, keeping you up to date on what's happening with the Nuggets on the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. Arif Dean is always on the ice with the Avs, who also spoke today, at least General Manager Chris McFarland and Gabe Landeskog. We'll get into some of that later on. So check out the Arif Dean podcast, Hockey Mountain High. Mile High baseball fans, as the Rockies, even as we speak, are in action, know they can get the latest on the Rockies with Drew Creasman and the 20th and Blake podcast. And the question of whether Bo Nix will be the answer finally after 12 questions were not exactly answered in the affirmative at the quarterback position for the Broncos. And, of course, many other aspects of the Bronco offseason. Troy Renck We'll keep you up to speed on the Broncos podcast, as our friend from the Denver Post is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. So you've got that. You've got a lot more. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're trying to sell your home in Colorado, I mean, one, you're in a pretty good spot. It's obviously one of the hottest markets in America, and it's beautiful weather starting to come in. It seems like a good time to sell, but you want to make sure that you do it right. So talk to my friends, Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team, because they know how to navigate this market. When we say luxury home team, it doesn't mean you have to have a luxury home. We're talking about the service you get, that high-end luxury service, whether it's a condo, castle, anything in between. Dave and Mark can take care of you. They're experts that know Colorado's market. As I mentioned before, the highs and the lows, they've been there and they've done that. They're a privately held company. You're not dealing with the big names. You're dealing with them specifically, and they've had 25 years in the exact same offices. As you can imagine, inventory still low around the Denver metro area. So homes that are priced right still sell really fast. So let Dave and Mark give you a free valuation so you can get that moving as quickly as possible. Now that spring is here and summer's coming, more and more people are going to be looking, spending those weekends going to open houses, all of those sort of things, looking to buy. So there's no reason for you to wait. Let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure that you're getting everything that you deserve. Here's how to get a hold of them. Call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or you can visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. Sandy, as we go back to the Nuggets, the concern, of course, and you pointed out after a few days away from the disappointing Game 7 loss at home to the Minnesota Timberwolves, that Calvin Booth and Michael Malone are generally going to sound as if they're on the same page. And there are things that I think both men could have done better. I think, obviously, when you look at how short the bench was and how fatigued the starters were, you did probably want to invest more time in those younger players and find out who could help you and who couldn't. Julian Strother had an opportunity. As you heard Calvin Booth say a little bit ago, he shot the ball well at first, and then he didn't. True. And then wasn't really able to get himself back onto the floor. But when you're playing a 34-year-old coming off the bench in Holiday and Christian Brown, and that's basically it, with a little bit of Reggie Jackson.
And Holiday wasn't in the rotation really until the very end of the season.
Up until the end, and a little bit of Reggie Jackson, who continued to actually tail off because he had to be played a lot during the regular season because of Jamal Murray's injury.
Right.
So there are things that Malone could do better too, but keep this in mind, and we'll talk about this with Jeff Morton in just a little bit. If you were to ask people who is the sixth highest paid player on the Nuggets, you might get a lot of different answers. Obviously, you know the starting five get paid the most, and they do. But maybe you're thinking, oh, is that Reggie Jackson because he's a veteran? No. Is it Christian Brown? No. Maybe it's Strother. He was a mid-first round pick, right? No. It's Zeke Naji. And it's Zeke Naji by a lot. Reggie Jackson has a player option in the upcoming year for $5.3 million. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has his own player option at $15.4. But Zeke Naji makes $8.9 million. Christian Brown, for comparison, makes $3 million. And that decision had to do with Calvin Booth, who signed Naji in the offseason after picking up his club option the year before and now extending him for 4 more seasons. It was front loaded a bit, so it's 8.9 this upcoming year, and then drops to 8.2, then 7.5 for the last 2. But at the same time, the problem is Naji doesn't play. And one of the things that the Nuggets have really done well, the Avalanche too, quite frankly, is when you've generally looked at the way their salary cap works and you've looked at who gets paid what, it's kind of syncs up with the merit for the most part. Naji sticks out like a sore thumb because he's a guy that only plays in garbage time, good or bad. And you can't trade a guy that doesn't play.
He kind of sort of was the backup early in the season. His performances were highly erratic, and he was dropped from the rotation. You assumed in the playoffs that the backup center would be, in effect, Aaron Gordon. And
who's a starter.
Times
already there's
Gordon
a problem with
that role. Well, there were times he filled the role, and at times he didn't. And I think you saw some problems perhaps materialize even during the Lakers series in the first round, when, as well as the Nuggets did in closing out the series in 5 games, they were behind for more than 2/3 of the series, trailing. And fact of the matter is, the Nuggets didn't have a lot of answers for Anthony Davis and LeBron James. In fact, they had almost no answers. Now, Anthony Davis made the second All-NBA team, and
Right.
LeBron James made the third All-NBA team. These aren't stiffs, but the Nuggets should have had enough. And they did get a good offensive series, at least a good offensive series from Porter. They should have had enough to be more comfortable in that series. And I was a little puzzled by their reluctance to use Jordan at all during large parts of the regular season and essentially during the playoffs, when I thought you could have stolen 3, 4, 5 minutes here and there from a veteran who knows what he's doing. He's not the shot blocker he once was, of course, but he'll get on the boards. He'll be fairly responsible. He's not going to turn the ball over a lot. I just thought, as has been Malone's tendency down through the years, he was way too rigid. I won't even use the word stubborn, although I think there were elements in his coaching approach to Game 7 that were just stubborn. I thought he was too rigid, even during the Laker series. And for a 5-game series, the Nuggets had to expend a fair amount of energy.
Yeah.
And they also had 3 guys who were dealing with injuries, certainly significant hurts, if you want to call them that, because you had Murray with a calf problem, Reggie Jackson with an ankle problem, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope with an ankle problem. They toughed it out.
Aaron Gordon had was not that far removed from heel issues.
I wonder if we'll hear, and I don't know that we did today, in more specific detail, how serious some of those ailments were, ailments that players played through. With the Avalanche, for example, and with most hockey teams, when their season closes out, you find that guys are going in almost immediately for surgery who played in the playoffs. You had no idea they were hurt at all. And all of a sudden you hear about surgery, and you hear about guys who were injured maybe in the last game or two. Yes, they played. Maybe they even played fairly well, but now they're going to have to deal with those injuries, and they may or may not result in those players being ready for training camp in September. That's hockey. In basketball, I don't think there's any sign that any of the Nuggets will require surgery or anything like that. But I'll tell you what, it's bothersome to me that Jamal Murray missed a lot of games during the regular season. That impacted the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And then even during the playoffs, had to play a lot of minutes in which he was not effective because of not just the calf injury, but all the other injuries that accumulated during the course of the year. You don't have to be 9-10 men deep for the playoffs, but you have to trust. And, the old Pat Riley line, which Malone pretty much followed, at least in the second round against Minnesota: play 8, use 7, trust 6. At the end of the day, Michael Malone only trusted 6 of his players. And I would say Gordon with the heel, that was a chronic ailment all year, and Murray with a calf, he had at least 2 of those 6 who were hurting.
Murray, by the way, in the last 4 regular seasons has played more than 60 games one time. Now he's come close twice, 59 2 different times. I get that in the last
And
4.
even if he had been good enough, he wouldn't have qualified for All-NBA.
Correct. Keep this in mind. You brought up a really important point, especially when we're talking about fatigue at the end of the year. Believe it or not, the starting 5 players for the Denver Nuggets averaged more minutes per game in the Lakers series than they did in the Timberwolves series. All 5 of them did. All 5.
That was
had
an
to play
ominous
more
sign.
minutes.
That was always
they
an
played fewer
ominous
minutes
sign.
In
a
Minnesota.
5-game series, they had to play the starters so much. Why? Because they were down in every game by double digits, save for 1. And that one game, they were down by 9.
Jokic, even by only sitting out 1 minute in Game 7, still averaged fewer minutes per game than he did against the Lakers. I mean, that's part of the problem to get past the Lakers. That was the toughest 5-game series you're probably ever going to see.
It was the most physically taxing 5-game series
that you're ever going to come out winning.
I ever saw the Nuggets play
Right.
and win. I've never seen, and I doubt there's ever been, a series either in the ABA or the NBA with the Nuggets where they've won in 5 games and trailed 70% of the time.
Right. So it was incredibly taxing, and that was part of it too. When you look at the idea of players in that series, by the way, for the Lakers, when you're looking at the minutes per game, Christian Brown played 13, Peyton Watson played 12 per game in that Lakers series.
Yeah.
Reggie Jackson, 10.4, Justin Holiday, only 7.2. That almost doubled for Holiday against the Timberwolves.
Right.
So the Nuggets have to find a way to do a couple things. They have to find a second ball handler. They have to probably find another scorer. As much as you like Watson and Brown, they're not scorers. You probably have to find a scorer. Justin Holiday was the closest they got, and that's why they had to play him against Minnesota. But you don't have a lot of money to fix it. And when you're looking at this draft, for one of the very few drafts in the even distant future, the Denver Nuggets hold both their picks. So they do have them both. Picks 28 and 56. Interesting that ESPN's mock draft that they had today had the Nuggets at number 28, picking Tyler Kolek, one of the top assist men in all of college basketball out of Marquette. That's the kind of pick that would make a lot of sense.
That is a popular mock draft selection for Denver at number 28. And I think he'd be excellent because he brings toughness and ball handling skill. He's a slightly more skilled version of Colin Gillespie, who I thought could have helped. But there is the issue of size, and as scrappy as he is, he's at a disadvantage on the defensive end of the court. I liked his offensive game, but Kolek's a little stronger, as we saw in the NCAA basketball tournament when Marquette played Colorado.
Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk about this roster construction a little bit further because our friend Jeff Morton from the terrific website, denverstiffs.com, the longtime sort of a fan site, news site, wrote a terrific article this week about how the team has to find a way to maximize itself under Nikola Jokic, and that may cause something of a realignment. So we'll talk to Jeff Morton in just a moment, but want to remind you here that with warmer weather, it's time to get outside and have fun with family and friends. And yeah, you can barbecue and you can cook and you can put that all together, but then you can't go out and have all the fun. You can't. You're just hosting. You can't take part in it. And if you were going to throw a party, you want to make sure you have a little fun. And even if you want to do that on one of those easy nights where you just want to pick something up, same place for you. That's Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Whether there's a half dozen folks over, just your family, or you're having a whole party of 50, you want to pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. I went there this week. It was delicious. Had the honey bourbon sausage, had the hot link, the smoked turkey, of course, baked beans and mac and cheese. Don't judge me on my mac and cheese. That happens on every barbecue. You can get them in Aurora at the Stanley Marketplace, in Golden at the Golden Mill, or at the corner of Dry Creek and University and Centennial. That's the one I visit. And the newest location open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And if you're headed to a show up at Red Rocks, you can find them there too. So, you know, you're craving a little barbecue right before your concert or whatever it is you're doing up in the beautiful Red Rocks Amphitheater. Well, they're right up there for you too. So give them a try at Rolling Smoke. Rolling Smoke Barbecue online, and you can order there as well at rollingSmokeBBQ.com.
Well, when it comes to Rick Perea, we know he's one of the premier performance psychologists in the country. He is on our station regularly, does a weekly podcast that airs live on Mile High Sports Radio, and right here, of course, every Wednesday afternoon at 5:30. But he has become our premier prognosticator over the last several months. Last year, after CU started 3-0, Dr. Rick Perea was one of the few who saw trouble ahead, and indeed there was a lot of it for Colorado, at least competitively, as they finished the season 1-8. And Rick Perea was one of those people who wondered how last the Nugget playoff experience would be this year in defense of their championship, predicting that they would go out to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the second round, which, as you know by now, they did. But more importantly, you get your checkup from the neck up on Wellness Wednesday every week. Rick Perea has worked with the Denver Broncos back in 2015 when they were last in the playoffs and, of course, world champions at Super Bowl 50. He has also worked with the Rockies and the 23 NBA champion Denver Nuggets. He helps middle and high school performers as well. He speaks in front of corporate audiences, but his full-time job this fall, as he revealed on his podcast this week, will be working with the Cherry Creek High School football program and head coach Dave Logan. So he is a man for all seasons. You can reach him at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933, or look him up at Dr. P at think1number4u.org. That's think1for-you.org.
Well, over at the terrific website, denverstiffs.com, the longtime website there, one of the OGs, if you will, of that website, Jeff Morton has a chance to join us. Jeff Morton, you can follow on social at Morton78. And Jeff, thank you for joining us here. After hearing from Calvin Booth and Michael Malone as the Nuggets finally had their sort of post-mortem on the season earlier than they had hoped for sure, what were your initial thoughts about what the Nuggets can do compared to what they would like to do?
I think the best way to describe this is I think this is a very chaste Michael Malone, very humble Michael Malone. I think he heard the criticism, and I think for him to say that he would go back on overplaying the players, basically is what he said, and burning them out down the stretch was big, because this is something he never does. And I think he heard the criticism, and I think that was a very good sign, at least to me. There's some quibbles I had for the rest of the press conference, which I think there's still a disconnect between Calvin Booth and Michael Malone in terms of
I agree.
youth on the roster, but I think otherwise it was an interesting, and that was my headline takeaway, was Michael Malone really kind of owning it.
And I think I'm glad he came closer to what his post-game reaction on Sunday night should have been. And I understand the emotion associated with immediately losing a game 7. But I thought for game 7, and much as I said the other day, I did not advocate for Michael Malone's dismissal. I did not suggest that the Nuggets lost the series because Michael Malone mismanaged every game, or at least all the games the Nuggets lost. What I did say was I thought he mismanaged game 7, and maybe some of the chickens came home to roost, and maybe he realized that. And he didn't get away with overplaying his starters down the stretch. I understood and said earlier, I understood the impulse. It wasn't like last year where they had first place clinched with a month to go. This year was much more challenging. But in the end, for all the extra minutes that people like Jokic and Murray got down the stretch, they actually didn't finish first, and they were kind of lucky to finish second. And it could have been a third place finish. But of course, maybe that would have been better if Minnesota, instead of Denver, had home court advantage in this series. Maybe it would have turned out differently. It was a wild series. But yes, I thought with several days to contemplate, he did reveal today more of a reflective side. And I criticized him the other day. I'll praise him today for having done that kind of, as Pierre Lacroix used to put it, deep reflection.
You know, I don't know if you've had a chance to read my article that came out yesterday. I talked about the disconnect between Booth and Malone, and they kind of admitted it today in a roundabout sort of way. And I think it's still there. I think that's one thing to watch going forward.
I do too.
But I think another top line kind of takeaway was Josh Kroenke talking about owing it to Nikola Jokic to do everything possible.
Right.
They didn't say that last year. You know, they had just won a title, and they
were feeling their oats last year at this time.
I think that's the best way to describe this last year. which they were feeling their oats.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, Jeff. I think that's a really interesting point because
Yeah.
we could get into that. I think the Nuggets actually did have, in the end, a little bit of overconfidence in their ability, especially their ability to
I think so,
continue
too.
coming from behind. But in your article, I want to, obviously you're aware of it, but don't read a little bit of it to people who are watching. You talked about Michael Malone, and you mentioned some things about his character. You wrote hot-headed, stubborn, extremely competitive, and very emotional. And then you went on to say it's exactly 0 of these traits that would lead one to believe that he would be on board with sacrificing win totals in order to develop a very youthful back end of the roster. And you brought up the idea that parity is coming to the NBA. Sandy and I spent time on that yesterday, but also pointed out that in Calvin Booth's case, probably a little naive to expect Michael Malone not to act like Michael Malone. And I think the best part you wrote about it was maybe the beginning of the part of the article that began with this sentence. It's not about who was on the roster in so much as it was their proportion. And can you explain a little bit why that's a challenge for Malone and why it's a challenge for Booth to be able to do anything but that proportion?
One of the reasons people keep pointing to Christian Brown, one of the reasons Christian Brown was able to succeed as a rookie is that he was surrounded by Jeff Green, Bruce Brown. He would often play with the starters. He was very protected. And when rookies are protected, they thrive. And a lot of their issues don't come to the fore. And what I saw this year was something that I point out in the article. There is, I believe now there's 18 spots on the roster. 3 of these spots are 2-way contracts that never will see the court. Another 6 of them were from first-year players and second-year players. When a coach sees that, he has no safety net. There is no safety net. And there is the one place where I really have a lot of sympathy for Michael Malone, which where he saw this. And when coming out of the All-Star break, if you guys recall, coming out of the All-Star break, the Nuggets went all starters all the time. And it was we're going to win. And then they went 21-6, I think, something like that. And that kind of thing is what you saw was inevitably going to be manifest in this thing. My worry coming into this year is that the Nuggets, as you pointed out, Shawn, they have 2 more draft picks. I mean, how many more
younger players? Right.
How many or more are you going to add to the roster? I don't know if they can afford to keep adding these players, specifically if we don't even know if the 3 that were brought in last year are going to pay off at any point in time.
And at that point, we get into Calvin Booth's drafting philosophy. He said today, 2 years ago, I drafted for defense, Brown and Watson. And this year we drafted shooters. Well, the shooters didn't get many opportunities to shoot. They certainly didn't play very much, if at all, after the early months of the season. And when they did play, it was largely because Jamal Murray was out that full month of November, basically. And I'm looking at somebody like Strother. And I even remember early on when he had a good game, generally speaking, Nikola Jokic was critical of him after the game. And that's very unusual for Jokic to be critical of a teammate in any circumstance. And it wasn't heavy, hard-hitting criticism, but it was criticism. And I noticed after that, Strother's minutes began to diminish rather rapidly.
I will point out another thing Nikola Jokic has been talking about. And this is something we all need to kind of be cognizant of. In hand with what you're talking about, with him criticizing a lot, be in the Jokic way. And when we're talking about Nikola Jokic, he doesn't criticize.
Oh, they're not broadsides.
Yeah. It's not like LeBron talking about Rob Pelinka or doing passive aggressive emojis on Twitter. No, this is just Nikola Jokic being Nikola Jokic. He speaks like this. And one of the things people need to understand is that twice during before and after the Minnesota Timberwolves series, Nikola Jokic was talking about how much he loved the Timberwolves and how much they were designed to beat the Nuggets.
And were the better
made
team,
an extra
was an opinion that not all his teammates shared.
Right. And it's so funny to me how people completely missed the Nikola Jokic talking about that someone had mentioned something about how can you stop this sort of thing. I think it was after game 6. And Nikola Jokic says, I don't know, clone myself.
Right. Yeah, he said that earlier in the
early
series.
Everyone should. Yeah, and Jokic should have
that he doesn't have enough, and he made that clear. He made it clear that the Timberwolves, of course, topping it off with the trade was Tim Connolly, who was, of course, the Nuggets GM. Chris Finch, Mike Honore, both assistants under Michael Malone. Monte Morris is even over there on Minnesota. This team was absolutely constructed to beat the Nuggets from people who know the Nuggets intimately, and Jokic was fully aware of that. And as you pointed out, he called it out.
He called it out, and he called it out in a way that in the Jokic way. And I wish he would have been a little more direct, but he did it in a Jokic way, and people completely just passed by it. And some of it was criticism in the form of compliments, is the way I look at it, because he was complimenting the Minnesota Timberwolves and about how they're constructed. What he was basically saying was, we were beat, and we're going to have to beat this team because they're in our division and all this stuff. And I'll be honest with you guys, I was looking for acknowledgement of that in this press conference. And when Josh Kroenke said we owe it to Nikola Jokic, I think that was an acknowledgement on his part. I don't know what they're going to do about it. I mean, I really don't know what they can do, but that's where the disconnect right here, where I see with Calvin talking about the draft picks and how the Nuggets are going to possibly even try to get better. That is where I'm having a hard time bridging the gap. But I think they're getting to where they understand that Nikola Jokic is the most important person in this organization, not the GM and not the coach and not the owner.
And they may also understand that Nikola Jokic has 4 years left on his deal, and there's absolutely no assurance that he will play beyond those 4 years.
Right. It's a finite amount of time, Sandy, and you understand this as well as anyone. There's a finite amount. Look at David Thompson. David Thompson had extraneous things happening to him when he was a superstar, and David Thompson was a superstar. The Nuggets were always at the top of the Western Conference in the NBA and in the ABA. Once he started having his issues, things went away. You have a very short amount of time with superstars. You just cannot take for granted that they're always going to be there or at their prime. And the Nuggets, I think, are now starting to understand that, like, we can't Tim Duncan this. Nikola Jokic is not Tim Duncan. It's completely different.
Even Tim Duncan had all-star teammates at times, and Nikola Jokic never has, and likely, given the cap situation, may never have one unless they develop from the existing roster or the young guys that Calvin Booth has drafted. It is a difficult place for the Nuggets to be in. If you have not checked it out, go to denverstiffs.com. Check out Jeff Morton's article. It's the top story, easy to find, and follow Jeff on social at Morton78, one of the keenest observers of this team in town. Thanks so much for joining us, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, we're going to set aside the Nuggets because they have their own work to do in the offseason, but it is baseball season, and something unusual could be happening with the Colorado Rockies. I'll explain in a moment, but I want to let you know that over the last 4 years, you have probably been inundated, and increasingly so, with ads for online sports betting, whether it's you hear it, you see it, you click it, it's all over. You can't dodge it anymore. And if you want to get involved in it and you haven't, it could be a little bit confusing to know where to step in. There are a lot of different offers. You don't necessarily know what they all mean. You can't compare them to one another. Well, that's what we've tried to help you with. So we're going to add one more part of it to the pile, but this one is going to be worth it for you because Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers and put them on one single page on our website, trying to make it easy for folks interested in betting to find the very best options. So we've researched it all and brought them all together in a way that makes it simple to know what's available, whether it's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of it. Everything is in one place. So visit milehighsports.com today or download our mobile app. And when you get there, click on Colorado Sports Betting, and then you can decide for yourself which offers are best for you. It's just that simple. Think of it as your bonus from your friends right here at Mile High Sports.
You know, the Memorial Day weekend signifies a lot of things, but you generally, don't you think summer begins this
It
weekend.
feels like it. Yeah.
I know that's not.
I don't know the whole
technically
solstice
true,
thing, but it feels
right,
like it. Right.
But it feels like the start of summer, and it's time to get out and play golf. The city of Denver has the perfect golf pass for you. Whether you're just getting started, or played for decades, they practice and play pass for those new to the game, so that you can practice what you've learned, transition it onto the golf course if you're one of those new players. Learn and Play Pass 1.0 is geared toward adult beginners, people who have never held a club, players looking to advance their game, or if you've been playing for a while, try the Learn and Play Pass 2.0, which is designed to be flexible, and it's geared toward intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. If you're just looking to have some fun, and that should always be a part of your golf experience, the Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or hit the driving range, and you can bring up to 3 guests with you every time. 8 unique golf courses and opportunities for all skill levels. Denver Golf, perfect for everyone. Learn more about everything Denver Golf has to offer by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. That's cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play. Denver Golf is your neighborhood course.
Well, the Colorado Rockies are playing right now in Oakland. They had a day game today. They're going to finish off that series before they head home on a homestand against the Phillies starting tomorrow. But the Rockies, interestingly, last night, now they had won. They had gone on that streak where they'd won 7 consecutive games, longest streak in almost 5 years. Then, well, they lost 4 in a row. But amazingly, Sandy, if they were to win today, they'd win 3 out of their last 4 series against their opponents. So things are starting to turn around a little bit, in part thanks to Ryan McMahon. Last night in a 12-inning game, Ryan McMahon in the 12th hit a 2-run home run. That's enough for the Rockies to get by them, even though they did give up a run in the bottom of the 12th, up by 2. They ended up winning 4-3 in 12 innings. McMahon keeps it going and said after the game, after that winning streak, all the guys in there feel a bit differently. And I think they know we're in every game, and having some success to do it leads to better results. Well, no one's been leading the way like McMahon, because Ryan McMahon, as it stands right now, Sandy, is definitely, because the All-Star game still requires one from every team, he's definitely the Rockies All-Star. But even if it didn't require that, he'd probably be one anyway.
Well, he's been one of the 20 top OPS guys for virtually the entire season, almost from the beginning. McMahon got off to a very, very slow start last year and then came on strong. This year, he's getting off to a strong start, and it looks like the year where everything is coming together for Ryan McMahon. And yet the story last night was also, once again, the starting pitching.
Yeah.
Remember when 8 innings, gave up 5 hits, 1 earned run, struck out 6, did not walk a batter. Now, how many Rockies pitchers going back years, maybe even decades, have gone through 8 innings and never walked anyone?
Well, I mean,
struck out
it's
6
been
or
a
more.
quarter
Never
century, so I mean,
anybody.
there's been some, but it's not a common occurrence.
It
Put
is
it that
not
way.
a common occurrence. He did give up a home run, but he threw 90 pitches in 8 innings. That's not
That's
a
really
Rocky
efficient.
starter.
Really efficient.
That's maybe Kyle Freeland. I'm thinking about in 2018. Maybe had some games like that where he threw 90 or fewer pitches over an 8-inning stretch, but that's extraordinary. 66 for strikes, comes out of the game with an ERA of 2.76 and a walks plus hits per innings pitched number of 1.11, which is sensational.
Gomber, by the way, now hard luck 1 and 2, but his ERA 2.76.
Isn't that amazing?
That's not just good.
He's pitched well.
That's kind of spectacular. So credit where it is due. And by the way, Chris Bryant, who is back, started playing at first, went 1 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. That's the bad part. But the good part is he also walked twice. So in 6 plate appearances, he got on 3 times.
That was a 12-inning game, and he played the whole game. He lasted 12 innings.
So on 3 times in 6 plate appearances, a little bit of progress there. And congratulations, by the way, to Matt Koch. Matt Koch with the save. Koch is kind of a journeyman guy. He hasn't played really, when you think about the career, an awful lot of baseball. He's 33 years old. He's only played in 80 games in the majors since 2016. 2016, 8 years ago. That was his first career save. And he did get one last night.
Right.
So as the Rockies try to cobble
even
together
though they gave up a
bullpen, so even though they try to cobble together a bullpen right now, the Rockies did find a way to get it done. Nick Mears with the win, obviously, is the bullpen has to go a decent way, even with Gomber going 8. But for the Rockies with that win, if they were to win today and win the series against the A's, again, they'd actually, despite the 4-game losing streak, they would win 3 of their last 4 series, coming into now a 6-game homestand in which they will have the opportunity to take on the Philadelphia Phillies and then the Cleveland Guardians. I mean, obviously, the
2
Rockies,
first-place teams.
Right. The Rockies are not a good baseball team. Don't get me wrong. But over the last 3 weeks or so, they have played notably better. You and I jumped a little bit on manager Bud Black early in the year, who seemed, quite frankly, and I'm overstating it, but seemed a bit, to use the colloquialism, maybe mailing it in a bit as the skipper. I think Bud Black now, as he's kind of had to massage this bullpen and do some work, I think he's been a little more engaged because he has more to do. And I think that's valuable too. When you're a last place team and you know you're going to stay in last, and the Rockies are going to stay in last, I think if you have something that Bud Black can continue to build, you're going to get a more engaged version of your manager.
Any manager, especially one with a pitching background, and Bud Black is the first Rockies manager ever with a pitching background.
Right.
It took him a while to get around, almost a quarter century, to get around to hiring a manager who actually had a pitching background. But it makes any manager look good when your starter can give you the kind of length that the Rockies have generally been getting lately from their starters. And this is minus Kyle Freeland.
And how about that? Well, it's also, and as we
rotation.
talked about it, we weren't going to have him for most of the year, if not all year anyway, but also not German Marquez.
Right.
Not Antonio Senzatella. 3 of the 5 guys that were expected to make up your rotation are out.
And as I recall, 3 of the guys who were in the rotation in 2018, when the Rockies won more than 90 games, tied for first place, lost a playoff game for the division title to the Dodgers. But that year, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they had all 3 of those starters, and they generally remained healthy. That has not been true since. And part of it is pitching at altitude under these conditions. There is additional stress, both physically and psychologically, on any pitcher. But today, you're playing in the Mausoleum, of course, which is pretty much a pitcher's park. And
it's not a park for fans.
They are finding ways to win both high scoring and low scoring games. And today seems to be of the low scoring variety.
Well, although Oakland only scores so much.
Right. That's true. But the Rockies are more comfortable, it would seem to me, in lower scoring games, especially on the road, than they generally have been in the past. You look at lower scoring games on the road over the years, with the exception of maybe 17 and 18, they're losing a large portion of those kinds of games on the road. Occasionally they'll break out offensively on the road, but for the most part on the road, you're playing lower scoring games as opposed to the type of baseball you're playing at Coors Field. And they haven't been very good at winning those games. I know it's the A's, and I know they're in last place, and I know they have 2 first place teams coming up on the horizon. Cleveland's 33-17, and the Phillies 36-14. They're 2 of the best, 4 or 5 teams in baseball right now.
Yeah.
The Guardians in the American League Central and in the National League East. The Phillies, who have a 6-game lead on the Atlanta Braves. Who would have imagined that coming into Memorial Day weekend?
Yeah, obviously, when you look at the starters, I mean, there have been challenges when you're talking about the top 2 guys. It's been really good, quite frankly. Cal Quantrill and then Austin Gomber, Quantrill, now 3-3. That doesn't matter. The wins and losses don't really reflect on the pitchers for the Rockies for sure, if they do, even for those stats anymore at all. But Quantrill with a 3.59 ERA and a 1.25 whip, walks and hits per inning pitched. Both of those things are actually pretty darn good for a Colorado Rockies pitcher. And as we talked before, Gomber's 2.76 and a whip of 1.11 is flat out sensational. And cobbling the rest of it together, when you talk about a Dakota Hudson, now. Dakota Hudson at 29 years old, not big part of the future. But at the same time, in his last 4 starts, all his starts in May, only once has he allowed more than 3 earned runs. And even that was 4. So you're talking about some better performances, guys keeping them in the games, especially for Quantrill and for Gomber. Gomber, of course, the big piece of the puzzle in the Nolan Arenado trade. Obviously, it always felt like a return that was a little disadvantageous for the Rockies, but
a little light,
a little light
for a player of Arenado's.
But when you look at least this year, and you look at a wins above replacement, and you look at that for pitchers, here all of a sudden is Austin Gomber at 2.2. Do you know where that is in all of baseball? You wouldn't guess. It's tied for 7th place in all of baseball. Austin Gomber, and we talked about McMahon to start the segment. By the way, McMahon is tied for 18th in all of baseball in wins above replacement. So things are going better for the Colorado Rockies, even though
they're playing the Oakland A's, which we mentioned is not exactly
not terribly good.
They have just hit 2 pop flies consecutively, both of which fell to the ground without being called.
It's obviously going to be a bumpy season. We'll stay on top of it, because it's our job. That's what we'll do. But they fly out after this one. Remember, of course, they will take on Philadelphia and Cleveland. Bryce Harper last year had a little bit of energy last time he came to town. We'll see if they bring that again next time. But we'll turn our attention, as we talked about it, press conferences all day. We'll go to the Avalanche in a moment, but you heard me talk about our friends at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team earlier for people who are selling their home. Well, maybe you're looking to buy. Well, you thought it was challenging to sell. Wait till you try to buy homes in Colorado right now. Really tough. The market's been crazy for years, and that's why you'll want to talk to my friends Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. It's that high-end luxury service you get whether you're buying or selling, whether you have a phenomenal luxury home or a condo that you're just trying to get into. They can help you with all of it, and you will get the exact same quality service, the kind of attention to detail, and the attention that you deserve from Dave and Mark, no matter what it is you're buying. They're experts that know Colorado's market. They know how to ride all the highs and lows. And to do that, and especially a market this volatile, you need a couple of things: experience and stability. Stability is not a problem. They spent a quarter century in the exact same office. And, well, guess what? After a quarter century in the same office, you can know the full well that they have the experience as well to help you out. The Fed is still expected to lower interest rates this year. So beat the competition and buy your new home before that frenzy returns to Denver. Remember, it's getting warm and nice weather. Every weekend, all the looky-loos are out trying to find those open houses and look for a home to buy. You'll want to make sure you beat them to the punch if the right one's out there. Maybe you're thinking of a new build. That makes sense. Home builders are offering great incentives, but you might not be getting all of them. You have the leverage right now. So let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure you're getting everything you deserve. They're easy to get a hold of. Call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group today at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them at keyrealestategroup.com.
Well, we talked about teams planning. The Nuggets, the Avalanche for the offseason, the Broncos for the upcoming regular season that begins in September. But no one ever plans for catastrophic developments, car accidents, major injuries that you might sustain in a car accident. But you need an attorney if you happen to be involved in one, and you need the very best. That's why you need to call Zahner Hardin Law. Kurt Zahner and Mark Hardin are the kinds of lawyers you want handling your case. Two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and throughout America. They've won nearly every award: Trial Lawyer of the Year, $1 Million Advocates, Super Lawyers, and the top 100 national trial lawyers. These guys handle the most important cases, work tirelessly to make sure our community is a safe place. With multi-million-dollar verdicts and the respect of every insurance company, you're lucky to have these guys around in our own backyard. So if you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zahner Hardin today at yourstorywillbetold.com. That's yourstorywillbetold.com. And Shawn, I have good news. The Oakland A's dropped 2 straight little pop flies, but the Rockies hit a third one in a row, and they caught that one. In spite of that, the Rockies have a 4-0 lead now today, and as you mentioned, a virtual assurance of winning a third series out of 4.
How about that?
In the month of May.
In the series
Very
in San
month of
Francisco,
May.
but otherwise, so far, so better than April for sure.
Yeah.
Looking for better than is also Gabriel Landeskog, who obviously his last game he played was the cup clinching game 6 against the Tampa Bay Lightning following the 2021-2022 season.
Been almost 2 years.
It's been almost 2 years. And as the Avalanche had their post-mortem as well, maybe not as shocking to leave after the second round, but maybe almost equally disappointing for an Avalanche team that felt like they had enough star power to get a little bit further. Obviously, we'll find out what happens with Dallas, and you may end up losing to the eventual Cup champs, and it looks better. But the news today coming out of the Avalanche, there are a couple big ones, but maybe the first one and most important one, not only because of what he means to the team, but even the financial impact, is the potential return for Gabriel Landeskog, who is definitely not retiring and is looking to get back to playing, although
he wasn't dressed well enough to be making a retirement.
Right. When it happens, though, is certainly going to be in question. Obviously, the Avalanche are not going to rush him. They've been very clear that they won't, and that's the right thing to do. He joked when he was likely to return and when training camp began. He said training camp, he would begin between mid-September and the start of April is his expectation.
He's giving himself a wide berth.
A very wide berth, but did talk about how difficult it has been to not play over these last 2 seasons. This sound courtesy of our friend from CBS News Colorado, Romy Bean.
Form of torture, I feel like. And, you know, it's win or lose, you want to be out there with the guys, right? Like, even after heartbreaking losses, you want to be in the room with the guys. You want to be around the guys. You want to be there to support them and just kind of go through all those things with them, whether it's ups or downs. But at the end of the day, I knew it wasn't necessarily my time, and I tried to support the guys the best I could, be around the team, which was probably equally as important for the guys as it was for me as well, and for my mental state, just to be around the guys and around the team. So hard, no doubt, but I just kind of kept telling myself that, you know, there'll come a time when you're back in there and your time will come, type of thing.
It's probably extraordinarily difficult to be patient. What he's trying to do, come back from the surgery he had, is unprecedented in NHL history. In fact, it's more or less unprecedented sports history. The only other significant athlete with the kind of surgery that Landeskog had is Lonzo Ball of the NBA, who has not yet been able to return either. So there is a possibility that this isn't going to work. But obviously, Landeskog feels healthy enough at this stage to feel that he can give it another go.
I think he made it clear today that he wants exactly that. He doesn't know when he will be fit to play. He is going to listen to all of the medical advice he's been getting. He spoke very clearly about his respect for the medical people around him. And the Avalanche will be leaning on those medical people too. The Avalanche won't be determining when Landeskog comes back, and Landeskog himself will only determine that. I would guess if there's virtual unanimity on the subject, and maybe it'll come in September in time for training camp. Maybe it'll come later in the fall. Maybe it'll come sometime in the winter. But my guess is that he will give it a shot at some point next year, and that there haven't been any setbacks. And that's always with an unprecedented type of injury and the rehab process that very few other than the aforementioned Lonzo Ball has gone through. And there have been setbacks with Lonzo Ball. The good news with Landeskog is that at least today, and from what we've heard over the last few months, there haven't been any setbacks. He's around the team more. He was during the playoffs. He was traveling during the playoffs. He wasn't doing that during the regular season. He acknowledges that there have been difficult times. He even admitted, and this is a guy with an unquestioned work ethic, there are days during which he really wanted no part of going to the gym or getting out and practicing, skating some. Days he didn't want to do it. And yet he has pushed himself. And the good news is that there have been no setbacks.
That's obviously the first step. And you're talking about a player that's meaning to the Avalanche is obviously extraordinarily significant. Named as the captain as a teenager and still so well respected that when we knew he was going to be out this year, the Avs didn't bother voting another captain anyway, just the same. But Landeskog got an opportunity also to let everyone know how close he really was to returning. And the answer is not all that close.
I guess we'll never really know, right? Like, it's such a big difference from laying, like what I'm doing is essentially laying the foundation to skating, my new kind of skating technique, with a new piece of my knee, right? Laying the foundation and playing in an NHL playoff game is very different, and I'm sure you guys all witnessed it. I mean, mentally I felt pretty close at times. I'm like, all right, well, I can do this. I can go out there for a few shifts here and there, but I think the best decision was made to just for me to focus on what I was doing throughout the entire playoffs, as hard as it was and as much as I wanted to be out there. It was ultimately the best decision for my health, and I think long-term for this organization as well.
Landeskog Sandy is owed $7 million every season through 2028-29. So obviously you're not paying him when I take that back. You are paying him when he's on long-term injured reserve, but he doesn't count against the cap.
Exactly.
If and when he is active, it immediately does. The Avs are only about $9 million above the cap right now. Casey Middlestat, restricted free agent, needs to be taken care of. Jonathan Drouin, we've talked about that. Joel Kivirant, Yakov Trenin, Brendan Duhaime, perhaps Jack Johnson and Andrew Cogliano. It's going to be tough to do all of that. And then you also talk about what might potentially happen with Valeri Nichushkin. We'll talk more about that tomorrow because Nichushkin isn't in the discussion until at least November. But in Landeskog's case, the Avs will find a way to make it work, but it will be tight. And keep in mind, I only mentioned the length of the contract because they're in for the long haul with Landeskog. There are many, many more years left on this contract.
Yeah, there are a lot of years left on his contract, but we don't know when he is coming back, and he doesn't count against the cap as long as he's inactive. And, there are different ways all this could play out. And I thought there were a few crumbs laid out at the press conference today involving the other subject, which we will pursue at greater length on the program tomorrow.
Requires a little more time for the nuance there.
I think with respect to Landeskog, Chris McFarland made it very clear we'll be thrilled when he comes back, regardless of exactly what time of the year that might be, whether it's preseason, regular season. I suppose if he doesn't play at all in the regular season, unlikely that he would play in the playoffs. I never quite understood a few months ago why the Avalanche, and this is Jared Bednar, is normally very cautious about these things, said, well, we have a date set that would conceivably, if we can stay alive long enough, be relevant and might lead to a possible return. From the way Landeskog talked today, he was ready psychologically, but physically he wasn't, and was told he wasn't, and knew he wasn't. And I honestly, I don't think he would have been ready a month from now.
We've
right?
seen
and the season's over in less than a month.
We've seen situations in which teams have, let's face it, basically hidden guys on LTIR. Tampa Bay did it a couple years ago and made sure that their player popped on Kucherov right as the playoffs started. Kucherov all of a sudden was better, and he doesn't want the salary cap only extends to the playoffs. We saw Vegas do it with Mark Stone. In fact, to the point where Mark Stone's wife, literally in the playoffs this year, was made sure on her social that she was photographed with someone who had a jersey with Stone's number, but the name instead of Stone just said LTIR. I mean, everyone knows what the game is, but when you've missed as many games and as much time as Gabriel Landeskog has, I don't think at any point, even if he's healthy enough, you want to just drop him into a playoffs. I don't think that makes any sense.
No, but you welcome him back with open arms. And I got a distinct feeling, and there's a reason he was at that press conference today.
Yeah. So you can see with your own eyes, he's not going anywhere. And he showed up in an Avs hat and a T-shirt, notably a T-shirt from a couple seasons ago, in which they had the Stanley Cup on it, like he was out there working.
And he also made the point, he's got 2 young kids who, for most of their lives, being as young as they are, have not seen their father play. They're aware that he plays, and he had a cute story about his son who's going to follow in his father's footsteps if his ability allows him to do so. Loves hockey. And when Landeskog mentions to his son that he's going to work, his son notes that, well, you're not really going to work because you're not playing. And Landeskog has to explain, well, yes, rehab is work, and I think he desperately wants to play again. So his children do have the chance to watch him play.
The other news, and not quite as positive, coming out of Artturi Lehkonen, who scored 6 goals in the playoffs, second only to Valeri Nichushkin's 9, has shoulder surgery set for next week. Hopefully,
How is he able to play? And not only
it's
play,
hockey.
but
These
play
guys are
well.
tough. They're tough. It is worth noting, of course, he had 5 goals in the first 5 games of the playoffs, and then only 1 from there out. Of course, the Avs completely short-circuited against Dallas. I don't know if you necessarily connected the two.
Right, but it's extraordinary. He will have surgery.
Yes,
and he was the player I was referring to earlier. He will have shoulder surgery, and McFarland acknowledged today that he might not be ready, at least at the start of training camp in September.
And I think you're okay with that. You're fine
with that. I don't care if he misses the first month.
You're especially much less concerned when it's a shoulder than it is a lot of things. Not that that's not important, but this isn't. But in Lehkonen's case, he's not a guy that's putting body checks on guys all the time up against the ice where you're going to impact that shoulder as much. Hopefully that gets better and you have an opportunity to get back, but something to monitor in the offseason for the Avalanche as they look to reload. Of course, the Denver Broncos wrap up OTAs today. Sean Payton and some of the quarterbacks had an opportunity to talk. We'll get to that more in a moment.
But not before, and it's getting to be that time in the afternoon.
Feeling a little peckish.
Shawn, I'm a little bit hungry, and a way to alleviate your hunger comes through GB Fish and Chips. You've heard their signature ads for years all over town, and by now you probably know that locally owned and operated GB Fish and Chips has the best drinks, meat pies, and fish and chips this side of the pond. But did you know GB Fish and Chips caters? They do. So with graduation and summer block party season right around the corner, summer effectively starts this next week. Give your friends and family a unique fry-on-site experience. The best part of catering, of course, is that you don't have to do any work. You sit back and watch GB Fish and Chips go to town. And they do it as no one else can. Stop by any of their 4 locations across the metro area or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
The Denver Broncos wrapped up their most recent OTAs, an opportunity to spend time with the units, spend time with the coach, get out on the field, non-contact as you'd expect, and not one of those times to get terribly into the evaluations of what quarterbacks look like because they're not being blitzed or blocked for or defenders aren't on the field. So in theory, you would hope that any NFL caliber quarterback should be able to just hit a guy standing a few yards down with nobody guarding him. But that's where, we are obviously teams with new quarterbacks. Fans look all over those moments. Sean Payton today after practice let everyone know, ignore. This is what we talked about yesterday. We talked about this. We're going to talk about it again. Sean Payton said that even though Bo Nix was with the starters today, but Jared Stidham also did it on Tuesday. Zach Wilson did it on Wednesday. They'll continue to rotate. He's not saying anything that's not true. They will certainly continue to rotate. But don't be fooled into thinking that's anything. But Bo Nix is still going to be quarterback number 1 on day 1.
Well, maybe Peyton Manning gave us a hint last night. He was being presented with a community service award here in town and spoke to the assembled media on hand. And as only Peyton Manning can do, managed not to oversell Bo Nix, although he knows him well. Bo Nix went to his academy once upon a time, and they've maintained a fairly close relationship.
As Manning does with a lot of
Manning does this with a lot of these
right.
college quarterbacks who go to the Manning camp, and he stays in touch with them, especially those who end up in places like Denver, maybe Indianapolis, the two teams for whom he played throughout his glorious career. But he managed to downplay the idea that Nix would come in and tear the league apart, but also suggested that sitting on the bench does a young quarterback very little, if any, good.
I've argued
whatsoever.
This for years
and
years.
He cited his own experience.
You get better playing by playing.
If you remember, in 1998, Peyton Manning's rookie year, the Indianapolis Colts went 3-13. And he threw, if memory serves, something like 28 pass interceptions that year. The next year, his second year, the Colts reverse that record and go 13-3. And Manning says that never would have happened had he not played all those games and made all those mistakes during his rookie year. He never could have played that well in his second season. Then he referred to brother Eli as having played 6 games in his first season, 10 games he did not play. And Eli, according to Peyton, would always say, I learned so much more in the 6 games I played as opposed to the 10 games I sat.
Manning last night being honored for his community work at the Mizell Institute last night, had a chance to, of course, talk about that. And here's specifically what he said, quote, I think any quarterback would tell you that being out on the field is where you learn things more than where you do sitting on the sideline. Any quarterback will tell you that. So when that happens for Bo and these quarterbacks, Shawn, meaning Peyton, will make that decision. But I do think experience is your best teacher. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I went 3-13 my rookie year and didn't play very well. And we went 13-3 the next year. There's no way that would have happened had I not played and kind of gone through those struggles and thrown those interceptions and figured out, hey, I can't do that anymore. These guys are faster. You kind of file it all away. This is what I've been arguing for years about any quarterback. The problem is, and I can tell you right from modern football, how Aaron Rodgers, by sitting behind Brett Favre, turned into Aaron Rodgers, a guy that multiple time MVP.
Because he sat
behind Favre. The two things did not connect. Favre didn't care at all what happened with Aaron Rodgers. He knew that was a guy drafted in the early portions of the draft, designed to take his job. So one had nothing to do with the other. Aaron Rodgers did not get better because he sat behind Brett Favre. He got better because he got to play, and it turns out he's really, really good.
And the same perhaps with Jordan Love. And Green Bay has historically operated on this principle with all of its great quarterbacks. Bart Starr sat for years before Lombardi came in, and even under Lombardi, he didn't start right away.
I don't even know who was the quarterback before Bart Starr. I don't know.
Well,
I know who Bart Starr is.
Some pretty good quarterbacks, but their first great quarterback was Bart Starr. They had great receivers. They had other wonderful players, Hall of Famers, but Bart Starr was the first great quarterback. He sat. Brett Favre sat in Atlanta, was traded to Green Bay, but he had already been in the league for a while, and there were growing pains. But Green Bay was rising as a team. They weren't a contender when Favre got there. They became one when Favre became Brett Favre. Just as Rodgers came in, first year wasn't great, but they soon became Super Bowl champions back in 2010, which I believe was Rodgers' third season. And he missed a lot of that season with injury, by the way. And then you have Jordan Love, who comes in, and by the second half of the year, he's playing about as well as a man who won consecutive MVPs in 2 of his last 3 years in Green Bay.
And there's your proof, right? Jordan Love's first half compared to Jordan Love's second half. Do you think the time he spent sitting was the problem, and that's why that's why it took him a handful of games
the last
to get better.
mediocre game he played was here,
right,
against the Broncos.
He got better as he played, and it turns out he's a smart guy that quickly learns from his mistakes. And as the season went along, he got better and better. You also saw that from C.J. Stroud over in Houston, a guy that the more he played, the better he got. You have to play to get better. It's one of the reasons Bo Nix will play. I didn't exactly nail Sean Payton's quote when I predicted what it would be yesterday. And if you missed any of that, you can always go to milehighsports.com to Mile High Sports free app for your phone, or the Mile High Sports YouTube/Mile High Sports. But asked about Bo Nix's progress, it was close. He said, quote, "He's further along than most would be. He's extremely smart. He's picked it up very quickly." So that's what you knew what you were going to get. But it was the next statement that was interesting.
Yeah.
Asked about when you make the decision to start or sit. And his response was, some of it is a byproduct of what you have in the building, whether you have a starter or not. Well, you don't have a starter in Jared Stidham. You tried it. Career backup, tried it for a couple. He's not a starter. Zach Wilson, who, by the way, last time I checked last year, was supposed to be being mentored by Aaron Rodgers as well. How'd that turn out?
How'd that work out?
Not a starter.
Even after Rodgers got hurt, he wasn't interested in mentoring Zach Wilson.
Even when Wilson had to play. No, we got to dismiss with that nonsense too. You want to find out if your rookie quarterback is going to be a good quarterback, play him. That's how you find out. Get him on the field. But the idea of whether you have a starter or not, Sean Payton knows he doesn't have a starter in Wilson or in Stidham. He knows that. Wilson is a reclamation project. He's a 1-year, relatively cheap deal that he's young and he has physical
1 year
ability
to prove he belongs in the league. And
Sean Payton likes the physical ability and throws a dart and says, let's see if we can do something with him. This is about Nix, and that's probably the way it should be. So it's interesting to see how all that ends up shaking out. And we know it'll be Nix. We know that going forward, this is the way it's going to be. But when you look at these OTAs at this point, and we will dig into more of this tomorrow, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about in the future shows. We'll talk about the cornerback position, the running back position, some of these positions in which improvement is definitely necessary for it to get better. But when you're talking about the Broncos now, Pro Football Focus today went through a ranking of all the best starting quarterback situations, right? And in certain cases, let's say the Raiders, where it's Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, or the Broncos, where even though it's going to be Bo Nix at the moment, the guy that finished the year as the starter is still on the roster, so they're looking at the setup there. As you can imagine, just looking in the AFC West, the Chiefs had numero uno, because you have Patrick Mahomes and some random dude out of the stands is still going to be situation number one. It could be me or you, and they'd still have the best quarterbacking situation in the league. We know that. The Chargers, with Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh now running the show, jump all the way to 5, which I think doesn't really sound out of whack. And then the Raiders all the way down at 30. And the Broncos at 32. Dead last in the league.
Well, why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't they be? Nix hasn't played a game yet. And to your point, I think Pro Football Focus would agree. There's no other starting quarterback in the building.
Right. I'll give you exactly what they said.
Who can play even alongside a bad team with no expectations. Zach Wilson even flunked that test, unless he was playing the Broncos in Denver over the last 2 years, and then he looked okay. So among those three, you have somebody who's never played a game, somebody who has started 2 games in the uniform he's in right now. I understand he started a handful of games for the Raiders his last year there.
Right.
And you have Zach Wilson, about whom the owner said, Woody Johnson of the Jets, during the year when Zach Wilson was playing, we really don't have a starting quarterback.
Russell Wilson last year among Pro Football Focus finished 22nd in overall offensive rank. And that was with a 77.5. You have to go down a bit, obviously, to try to find the rest of the Broncos quarterbacks because they're not even in the top 50. 52 is Zach Wilson at a 58.2, just slightly ahead of Cooper Rush, if you'd like to get the idea of where that is. And Jared Stidham even lower than that at a 55.5, furthering the idea that it is going to be Knicks or bust. But that makes this Broncos offseason obviously very fascinating. They'll get back at it when you're talking about the OTAs. Next week, it is the mini camp, the mandatory mini camp that happens next month that will be the most fascinating, because that will have an idea in the Cortland Sutton situation as well.
Yeah, so that's the big news surrounding the mandatory minicamp, no doubt, whether Sutton appears or not.
And the expectation is that he will not appear at any of these OTAs, at least until then.
There's no way.
Yeah, so that part is interesting, but things get underway, and a little bit interesting to hear from Peyton Manning the idea again that playing is what matters. You probably didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out, but that's how you can ignore the coach speak. Bo Nix is the guy. Big day today, of course. Thanks to Jeff Morton for joining us. Terrific to always talk to Jeff. You can give him a follow on social at Morton78, a great article over there at denverstiffs.com. The idea coming into a Memorial Day weekend, Sandy, the Rockies are playing a little bit better. Not that they're good, but better is better now that there's no Avalanche and Nuggets games to watch. Those two teams have a lot to deal with as well. So thanks to you for watching us. Thanks to Danny Bailey for putting it all together. We always appreciate Danny's work. As you can see up here on the desk, we have these little knobs. That's all we do. So without that, without Danny, none of it happens. So
that's the extent of our technical expertise.
Also that. And I know how to use some
right.
things on this computer, and that's about all we got. So thanks to Danny for putting it all together as he does every day for this program. Really, really valuable. The idea tomorrow, we'll talk about some of this onto a weekend. Maybe we have to make it an early football Friday, and maybe even a little baseball. But we'll also talk about some of the challenges with the Avs and with the Nuggets going forward, especially going off of what we heard today at the press conferences. We'll dig in a little bit more to certain situations. Valeri Nichushkin, the cornerbacks for the Broncos, and the Nuggets salary cap situation. How can they really get better? What if the Malone and Booth aren't on the same page? All of that's set for tomorrow, but we're done for today. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you tomorrow right here on Mile High Sports.